"You wasted your life," she says, flattering both herself and him. Well, in the companion essay for Compressions, the central section of this book, I speak about what's turned out to be a long commitment to brevity. Early on in my prose experience, what to leave out in story compelled me as much as what to put in. I thought mastery more possible within a small frame, an odd notion perhaps. By the time I wrote Who Wrote the Book of Love in 1977, when I published it, I'd been working in prose units no longer than several pages. Some of these fables, only half a page, none of them with titles, characters often unnamed. Compared to what, in 1988, my third-person nonfiction meditation on writing and the writer's life, I felt free to have chapters 1 or 2 lines long. I liked the white space. Saw no reason poets should have sole possession of such rich terrain. It was a take back the night situation as far as I was concerned. Poet translator Stephen Mitchell, reading an early draft of Price of the Ride, suggested that testing the brevities 1 or 2 to the page would establish their strength. Right he was. But I also enjoyed the sensation that so much blank page was illicit. Edmund Jabez believed that white space is, quote, stronger and more violent than the text. It's necessary that writing have a great space in and of itself to support the white space. In any case, at the end of this essay in Compressions, I talk about the value of epigrams and their cost. No medicinal value? Surely it's worth something to articulate such complexities as the music of language allows. And then, too, there's the joy of trying to achieve the verbal equivalent of prime numbers, of working one's way toward the irreducible and so untranslatable. Forget even the theoretical possibility of paraphrase. What was said is. And though bitterness may be the risk of satire, we may conclude that love of even the weapon is nonetheless a form of love. Well, if I was beginning to defend what I was up to in the epigrammatic, there's good reason. Recently, a friend of mine got a copy of Truth Be Told, and on the back it says that the epigrams are cheerfully merciless. His wife is ill, and she's going to die. Illness is merciless. Gallows humor of the kind that I'm trying to do in Truth Be Told is best, of course, when the struggle still has hope or the crisis has been survived. In the face of real loss, I think all verbal strategies pall. On the other hand, I think of my nephew Bill, a surgeon, who tells jokes nonstop and whose patients tell him many jokes. Sometimes humor redeems even suffering. I'm going to read now a few of the epigrams from Tongue-Tied, which is the last section of this book, and then some excerpts from the final essay. As I said, then I'll sign books and meet those of you who want to hang out down at Café de la Paz, drinks, food, and some salsa music DJ'd by Michael Ellsberg, maybe even some dancing. Comes the question, when do we get to ask our questions about what you're doing? When I was a kid, we said, ask me no questions, I'll tell you no lies. Well, a few epigrams from Tongue-Tied. I asked 3 or 4 of you to tell me if I was screwing up. I don't see your gestures, Jan. Okay. Some epigrams from Tongue-Tied. Question. Have I wasted my whole life? Answer. No, not yet. Spacious bedroom. Room for misunderstanding. Spacious bedroom. Room for misunderstanding. She hopes he doesn't fuck like he eats. She hopes he doesn't fuck like he eats. Sometimes you see stuff that disturbs you and you just have to find a way to comment on it. You know? Right. Humor's aggressive component. But then, difference between a joke and a war? Right. Humor's aggressive component. But then, difference between a joke and a war? Viagra makes you remember. You all know what death notices are. You know, the listing of deaths in the newspaper. Sometimes the play in an epigram is simply transmuting noun to verb. Obituaries, death notices. Death notices? Oh, sure. Death doesn't miss a living thing. Obituaries, death notices. Death notices? Oh, sure. Death doesn't miss a living thing. Sometimes in the epigrammatic, the play is simply torquing the conventional meaning of a phrase. For instance, last line of our tale? Oh, death sentence. Last line of our tale? Death sentence. Well, I'm going to conclude the reading now with some excerpts from this last essay. It's called Testaments and Mea Culpas. Recently, I turned 60. Don't tell anyone. 60, a wonder-working number as 30, 40, 50 never were. Over the years, I'd experienced a bemused remove from the dismay of others confronting such benchmarks. But 60? I felt fast-forwarded. Victim of mistaken identity. Read the digits as a measure of my debt to time, like a losing gambler at evening's end who'd almost convinced himself the chips were just chips. More, I was faintly embarrassed, as if having contracted a social disease. 60? Not that there wasn't fair warning. As I turned 54, an artery in my heart tried to occlude. What a beautiful word, huh? Occlude. Close call, but life went on. Then 2 years ago, I became the good friend of a woman in her mid-30s who worked with seniors, the over 60s. Of course, I realized I'd soon qualify to be one of her clients. Picking her up at work, I couldn't fail to see the wheelchairs in the lobby. Wheelchairs are for others? Also, receiving yet another fifth-year report from my college class, I was sobered by the growing number of death notices. Memento mori. Remember that thou must die. Memento mori. I'd presumed an exemption. Son of a famous physician who built the world's first hospital for the care of children with cancer, now about a mile from our beautiful home, I grew up with the capacity to make an absolute distinction between those dying kids and my siblings and myself. Years later, arriving in California at age 20, I had the sensation there was no dying here. So much milder the climate, so much freer of the dead hand of the past than my native Boston. Just 60 then, and those 60s, the former 50, I reread. It's funny, isn't it? Wish I had come up with that idea. Just 60 then, and though 60s, the former 50, I reread The Snowman. Wallace Stevens arguing that you need a mind of winter. A mind of winter to behold the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow. A mind of winter. This time, the phrase spoke both of one's response to the physical world and to my animus for a third batch of very brief winter's tales. I like water. See the dying man? Not long for this world.